Did you make a list of pros and cons? The Franklin T, as they sometimes refer to it, and weigh those pros and cons on the initial decision?
I probably should have. I didn't.
Welcome to the Less Than Obvious podcast. I'm your host, Jim McDonald. My guest is Jacob Ross, one of my favorite people that I met in 2017, and pretty much period. He and I have talked about his story on a podcast before, not this one, but I wanted to take a more granular look at what happened with the decision he made. His shift from dedicated grad student to sports performance coach was so fast, your head may spin. Let's get into the conversation.
My name is Jacob Ross. I am a sports performance coach and consultant.
The decision that I wanted to talk to you about was you were in college, you were working on a PhD.
I was in a master's program, but planned to do a PhD in neuroscience.
Okay. How did you get to that point? Like what was there a day, what was the day that you decided to say, I think I'd like to get a PhD in neuroscience?
It's really interesting. I as I get older, I realize, and you have the benefit of looking backwards.
Right.
It's really more of a slow burn than it is an aha moment, for at least in my life. And I was in school. I wasn't quite 100% sure of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to train athletes professionally, but I also knew that's very difficult to get into. And if you go the college coach assistant route, you're basically a coach. You're moving, your family's always up. You're kind of tied, your success is tied to someone else that maybe doesn't have anything to do with you. And none of that was appealing to me. So I said, I was good at school. I had a really high GPA. I made the dean's list or whatever. I had academic scholarship. So I said, if I'm good at school and I don't know what to do, I should just keep going, because they would offer me a scholarship for master's. Awesome.
Where were you at school?
TCU in Fort Worth, Texas Christian University. So I was doing a master's in exercise physiology and did all of my actual study for my thesis, did all of my coursework, crushed it. I had about, I don't know how many thousands of blood samples to run and data to analyze. And I just kind of thought to myself, what's the end goal of this master's? The next step is a PhD in exercise physiology, which, God bless the people that do it, I just didn't care about. Because at that level, there's not a lot of people who are analyzing and really doing hard research on athletic performance. It's more about, how does exercise physiology play into medical physiology issues? How does it affect diabetes, cancer, obesity? All really important questions.
Cardiac rehabilitation.
None of which I cared to scrutinize to that level. For instance, we had a professor who was looking at GLUT4 transrelocation that happens during exercise to pull blood sugar, out of the blood into the muscle, because it happens independent of insulin. And they were analyzing about 70-something phytochemicals to see which one or combination of those, as a result of exercise, stimulated GLUT4. So, because if you can figure that out, you can make a pill. And if you can make a pill, you can stop giving diabetics insulin. Right. You can just give them this. And again, glad that's happening. Didn't care. Just didn't.
Not your bag.
No. I did performance. I researched performance. My supervising professor did what I ended up doing privately for a long time. He was training Jane Fonda and Mike Singletary and all these incredible athletes and people throughout the 70s and 80s, and he retired to teach because he's like, I just want to settle down and do that. And I wanted to do that, but I didn't know how. I had become really close with Dr. Gary Boehm, who was the head of the neuroscience department. And for me, the brain was like the final frontier, Star Wars. So it was the thing to me that was just fascinating and almost endless in terms of your study. We really still don't know very much,
right,
compared to what there is to know. Whereas with exercise physiology, those still burning questions they drill down so hard, I just lost interest. And to me, the brain was incredibly more interesting. There's a great book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books. It's amazing. Even if you're not into neuroscience, it's an amazing book.
Okay, first, I know and you know that the final frontier is Star Trek and not Star Wars, but we're going to get past that. The book he's talking about, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, has been a bestseller for a long time, since 1985. It's a collection of cases about how our minds play tricks on us. Not the subtle ones like not being able to remember where you left your debit card or the name of someone you just met and you're about to make an idiot out of yourself by asking again. No, this is big things, like literally thinking you should put your wife on your head like a hat, or feeling that your leg belongs to someone else. He's written several other books, including Awakenings, which was made into a movie starring Robin Williams as Oliver Sacks. They actually look a good bit alike, and it's sad and ironic that Robin Williams is thought to have killed himself not from regular depression, but from the effects of a form of dementia. Dementia eventually keeps your brain from functioning normally, and anyway, you can see why you could find neuroscience interesting.
I had taken a couple of classes in undergrad. In grad school, I elected to take, 9 hours of neuroscience electives because I just found it fascinating. And him and I had spoken about combining to do some cool research. How does exercise affect things like memory loss or, different conditions? And to me, that was incredibly fascinating mixture. Mm-hmm. And I was set to do that. So I was going to finish my thesis, graduate with my master's, and then switch over to neuroscience. I just didn't see a future in continuing education within my current major or the traditional route of going and being an assistant at a college and working your way up.
Mm-hmm. And so what was the thing that took you off of that path? And how did it come about?
So, again, and have the benefit of hindsight, slow burn. I always worked out, obviously, often in college. Uh-huh. I played basketball often, but I always played in the old man professor game at like noon, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And in the summers, this guy would come back who was in really good shape, and turns out he was a coach on the Chicago Bears. He used to play at TCU. And he noticed quickly that I was training people, I was training myself in a very athletic, more hardcore fashion than most of the training you would see. So one day he just came up to me, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing?" And he just was really interested in my story and what I was about. And over the years, when I was at TCU, we just kind of became friends. I'd see him in the summer when he was back on break. We'd train together, play basketball together. And he was actually thinking at the time about getting out of coaching and doing sport performance. Mm-hmm. So he was interested in maybe doing something with me. I mean, you don't know. You're just talking about stuff. Well, he decided to stick with the NFL and coaching. And he knew a guy named Elias Karras who owned a gym in Chicago that trained professional athletes. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Elias was looking for younger, highly educated, highly motivated, had lots of time to give to the business and passion and knowledge, and he was trying to find people like that. And so Andrew, the coach, independently of me, said, "I know this guy in Texas. I think he would be great for you. Can I put you two guys in touch?" And Elias like, "Absolutely." So I was actually walking out of a functional neuroanatomy final. I'd stayed up for about 2.5 days studying for it with a couple of Call of Duty breaks. And my phone rang. And I think if I wouldn't have been so tired, I wouldn't have answered it because I never answer a call that I don't know who it is. I just let it go to voicemail. Yeah. But I answered it, and it was Elias, this guy from Chicago. "My name is Elias Karras. I own this gym. Here's my website. We train professional athletes. You can check out who we train on there. I would love for you to fly up and visit." And he said, "Well, when can you fly up?" This was on a Wednesday. I'll never forget it. I was like, "How about Friday?" He was like, "Awesome."
It's quick.
So I did. I flew up that Friday, walked in cowboy boots. He thought that was strange. And I got to work training people. I trained Notre Dame football players. I trained Luol Deng that day. I trained college basketball, college soccer, high school football, about 7 hours straight. Anything under the sun, I trained.
So when you were in the academic setting and you were thinking about your next move after your master's, were you picturing what that would be like on a day-to-day basis, working on a PhD, studying neuroscience, like what you wanted to accomplish in that area? Were you visualizing that?
I was. I don't know if it was as focused as that. Like I was consistently meditating on it, but I was giving some good thought to what that would look like for me. And to be honest, I wasn't crazy excited about it. I liked the knowledge. I liked acquiring the knowledge. I didn't like research at that level. I wasn't fired up about being in academia as a lifestyle where you kind of work yourself up to being tenured and you're presenting papers and conferences, and none of that was really compelling to me. But you also kind of get so far down a road, you just kind of have to either commit or go home.
Right.
And when you're in college and thinking about what you're going to do for the rest of your life, and the time is ticking on having to get a job and making some money and taking care of yourself independently of school, again, it's kind of like a slow burn. You kind of make choices, and before you know it, you're down this road. And I didn't feel like starting over. So I felt like at the very least, I'll follow something I'm passionate about. Because if I'm passionate about it, I think I can deal with the side of it that I don't like.
How old were you at the time?
I finished undergraduate at 20. I just turned 22. So maybe I was about to turn 24.
That's turned 24. And where were you relative to your master's? Like how close to being done?
The only thing I had to do was write my thesis. Now, a lot of people think that's like an easy process.
It is not.
It is not an easy process. There was a lot of blood work to be done, a lot of data to analyze. And our thesis at TCU, because our professor went to Ball State, which is a very well-known exercise physiology lab, our thesis was more like a mini doctorate.
Yeah. Super high standards.
Yeah. I think mine would end up being 180, 200 pages, something like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people write a thesis with like 30.
Yeah. I think my master's project was 60.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good one.
And
too.
a lot of that was exhibits and stuff like
Sure.
that. So but yeah, no, that took me. The classroom stuff took me a year. The project took me another year.
Yeah, and that's what I was looking at. I was looking at. So, I flew up there, was interviewed by training, went well. He offered me a job. So then the decision was, I have about a year left in the lab, and then I can write. And then I can go on to pursuing a PhD.
So you're talking about maybe up to 2 years to finish the master's?
I think if I was fully focused on it, because I'd finished my coursework, maybe a little over a year, like a year and 3 months, I could have probably done it. But then you tack on another 4 or 5 years of a PhD. I'm looking at 30 basically by the time I'm done with school, moving into a more, the higher levels of career in terms of academia. Not even the higher levels, but basically the bottom level. And or I could move to Chicago and not make a lot of money, not know anybody, and pursue an opportunity.
And how dug in were you at TCU? I mean, how far from home were you?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I was raised in a small town called Pittsburgh, about 3 hours from Dallas-Fort Worth area, roughly, and grew up on a farm. I never, ever, ever imagined leaving Texas, ever. To that point in my life, I think I had left Texas, just period, twice. I've been to Florida once, and I've been to Hawaii once. I never left the state. I mean, I've been to Arkansas, but Oklahoma, that doesn't count.
It doesn't count. That doesn't even count for the
people. That's not
traveling.
That's the same thing.
Yeah, that doesn't count for anybody anyway. Go on.
I mean, they're not Texas, but it's not that far. It's like an hour away from where I live. So for me, that was important. And I was one of those kids that chose TCU because I wasn't too far from home, but I was far enough because I enjoyed going home. I enjoyed seeing my family. I enjoyed my farm. I enjoyed, having a chance to relax at home, get a break from school. And I was also pretty dug in at TCU. I was an RA. I worked myself up fairly high within that kind of hierarchy. I did summer housing where I worked with all the camps in terms of placing them. I knew the chancellor decently well. I knew a lot of people at TCU pretty well in terms of staff positions. And I think there was probably nowhere I could go on campus that I wasn't, welcomed. I was very good standing at TCU. So I was really entrenched. Very entrenched into TCU, Texas, and what I thought I was going to do.
So when you made this decision to leave school and move to Chicago, it happened very quickly, right?
Yes. So final on a Wednesday, flew up on a Friday. I got an offer on a Saturday. And it was a mutually beneficial offer. It wasn't a ton of money at first, but I didn't feel like, as someone coming out of college, I deserved a ton of money, to be honest, even though I had a lot of experience because I would train anybody for free. And I had done a lot of research within performance specifically. But I still feel like anytime you're working for someone else and they're paying you basically their money, if you don't own the place, they're paying you their money. People always say, like with the customers, well, yeah. But at the end of the day, they own the business. It's their money that they're giving you. They're giving up X amount of dollars, investing in you to help grow their business.
Right.
I didn't feel like I deserved some sort of crazy salary and demands and all this. So I said, hey, let's find a good number and let's make it a 3-month trial. That was the offer on the table. If it doesn't work out on either side, if I didn't like it or he didn't like it, I was done. And I figured I could basically take the summer, and worst comes to worst, I go back to school in the fall. And I had about, maybe 2 or 3 days to decide, because in the sports performance world, especially privately, summers are big money makers. All the high school kids are off. NFL off season's going on. NBA off season isn't too far behind. So you start to run into kind of that confluence of potential business revenue, and you need help, and you need to know who that help is and how good they're going to be. So I didn't have maybe a couple of days to make that decision.
It's like retail Christmas.
Exactly. It really is. It really is.
You make the bulk of your money for the year in that few month stretch.
You got to make hay while the sun's shining.
Yeah. So did you make a list of pros and cons, the Franklin T as they sometimes refer to it, and weigh those pros and cons on the initial decision?
I probably should have. I didn't.
If you're not familiar with the formula that Ben Franklin used to make decisions, definitely look it up. In a nutshell, you make 2 columns, often but not always in the shape of a T, so that you can write the pros on one side and the cons on the other. Sometimes that's enough. When the one list is much longer, it's pretty easy to make a decision. If not, you need to give weighting to each of the pros and cons and figure out where the tipping point is. Anyway, look it up. I'm not going to get any further into it. I'd say, however, if you're trying to recruit someone like Jacob, the cachet of immediately getting to work with pro athletes is probably a pretty strong lure. So if you can provide some kind of cachet, that's going to help. Throw in some urgency, some fear of missing out, and just enough money, and you'll probably get that person. I'd encourage you to use this information both ethically and responsibly.
Again, having the benefit of hindsight, and it's the only thing I can filter it through, right? I can't go back to my mind at the time, but from what I remember and looking at it backwards, a couple of things that really influenced my decision to leave. One was the opportunity to pursue in my mind what I thought I wanted to do. Having a chance to skip the waiting line, and go right to the front and directly start training with pro athletes. I did it in my interview. So I thought that was amazing. I noticed that, in my opinion, the business had a great reputation because of the training and the service that they had, but they didn't have any legacy pieces in terms of staff at the time. So I felt like there was an opportunity for me to make an impact. There was room there. Some business you go to, they're functioning so well, you can be awesome and nobody notices, because where is there to go? There's 10 great people around you.
Right.
And so that was important to me, to have the ability to make an impact. I think having the safety net of school being there helped. If my professor would have said, if you leave, you're never coming back, that would have thrown a wrench, I think, into it for me, because how dug in I was. I mean, knowing that it's a fallback plan. And I think really good entrepreneurs, you always hear about people who like risk it all, but I think really smart entrepreneurs and business people know what their backup options are.
It's not about really going all in.
No.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, don't get me wrong, moving to Chicago and not knowing anyone or anything, or ever living in a city even remotely like that, or visiting a city like that, it's for sure all in, but it's a calculated risk.
Mm-hmm. So did anyone try to talk you out of it?
My mom tried to talk me out of it. For sure, my mom tried to talk me out of it. She didn't want me to leave Texas, and she also didn't want me to throw away school. My mom had a master's. She was a teacher, so she valued education quite a bit, as did I. And she was like, in her mind, she was like, finish your degree first. That's the safe route. You have that to fall back on. In my opinion, I was like, in a year, that job might not be there.
Right.
And I don't know where I'm going to find another opportunity like that, because this one literally called me, not the other way around. That's rare. And then my dad was probably the opposing voice. Now, my dad, he was a military brat growing up. His dad was a 35 years to the day Army service member.
Wow.
So my dad lived in Germany and Rhode Island and Oklahoma and all of Italy and all over the place growing up. Actually, this is a funny sidebar that you might edit out, but I have to say the story.
Okay, so the next minute or so is not as family safe as the rest of the show, or really safe for anybody who's squeamish at all.
When he was in Italy, he was around 9 years old, and I guess the town he was in, they had no sidewalks, but they had bicycle lanes. So he stepped out from behind a building into what he thought was a bicycle lane. And it was a bicycle lane, but a car was driving in it. And a lady had her hand, window rolled down, hand on the window body of the car, just, hanging. So my dad steps out, opens his mouth to scream. His teeth hit her hand and literally cuts her finger off.
Oh my God.
Literally cuts her finger off, and he loses his teeth, of course.
Oh my God.
Anyway, that's a crazy story about him in Italy.
Oh.
Not one you hear every day.
Yeah, be careful when you're crossing the street in Italy. That's the bottom line there.
So my dad was an Army brat. He did a couple years of junior college. He was in the Army as well for a few years, and then he went to work at a power plant and said, this is a good opportunity for me to provide for my family. That was his mentality. He never had a chance to do what he wanted to do. He never had the luxury of, this is my dream, I want to chase it. He never had that. He never had his parents pushing him to pursue his things he was passionate about. He was raised in a sense of duty and responsibility, which is awesome. And his hope for us was, I'm going to work my ass off so you, my brother and I, would have the opportunity to pursue things we were passionate about.
So he was a work to live, and he hoped that his kids would be live to work.
Exactly. And I would even say, out of necessity. In the town I grew up in, there wasn't a ton going on. Mm-hmm. Power plant was a good opportunity. At the time, he was maybe $60,000 to $80,000 a year, which is a lot of money in a smaller town.
Oh yeah.
Now he worked 12-hour shifts. He worked nights and days.
Yeah.
There was times where he would work, take every overtime he could and work for 30 days in a row to try to help pay for something, in our house. And my mom was a teacher. She worked hard too. And so my dad was like, it's really important to me. And my mom supported that. My mom ended up stopping further education because she wanted to have a family. And she's like, I'm going to go teach, and that's what I'm going to do. So I think both of them really wanted that for us. My dad was like, screw school. I worked my ass off to give you an opportunity to do what you want to do. This is what you want to do. Go do it. There's no reason that I can think of to value that piece of paper so highly over an opportunity to do what you've always wanted to do. And that was really, really impactful for me. Really impactful for me.
I want to take just a second to point out how enlightened this was on his dad's part. As a parent, I know that it is really hard to do this, and I've done it, and it's quite challenging to put your kid's dream above the image you had in your mind of what they were going to do. Anyway, bravo, Dad. So in that first 3 months, were there any times that you regretted the decision?
Absolutely. So when I moved in, I rented a room at this house. They may or may not have been swingers. It was a very strange environment, especially, remember, this is a kid from rural Texas.
Right.
I would say I was fairly progressive. Like I wasn't, closed-minded or a prude, but at the same time, this is very strange for me. So that was part of it. I worked 13 days on, 1 day off for sure the first 3 months.
Wow.
I would sometimes sleep at the gym because I had to be there at 5 a.m, and I'd work until like 11 at night. So I'm like, there's no point in 30-minute drive home and 30-minute drive back to sleep in a little room I'm renting out. I might as well sleep on the couch, wake up at 4, get a pump on, and then go train some people.
Right.
And I really poured myself 100% into that. But I would say at the expense of relationships, at the expense of being social, at the expense of basically everything I had spent my entire life building, I kind of disregarded to pursue that. And no one asked me to do it. My boss didn't say you need to work 13 days in a row. I just knew if I'm going to do this, I had to be all in. There's no alternative. There's no point in moving that far, putting myself in that situation, turning down everything I had been building in Texas to do that if I wasn't going to do it to the best of my ability. And I also had this chip on my shoulder of, nobody really sees how this is going to turn out. Nobody really understands what I'm trying to do here. The only way that I can show them is to show them. I can talk about it all day long, but unless I get up here and really make this thing work and work well, no one's going to truly understand what I'm doing.
And you just felt as though this is how it's going to be right now.
It's not really a choice. The choice is in how close do I want to be to home? What weather do I want to live in?
Right.
So once I'd made that choice, to me, the rest was easy. And I think it's similar with this decision. Once I had decided that I'm going to pursue this, I'm all in, I'm going to move to Chicago. The choice was made at that point. Now to follow through with that choice and I think this is where I get from my dad and my mom, the responsibility, the duty, the sense of obligation that I created for myself. Because to me, responsibility, it's not this, drummed up rule book. Responsibility is seeing issues and problems and being the person to fix them, not passing it along. So in that business, as I see things that need to get done, with myself, I see things that need to get done. I just have made a mental commitment to get them done, whatever it took.
And when you regretted that initial decision, those moments, what part of it did you regret? Not having the free time, or not being in Texas, or not having the kind of schedule that you had, working on academic projects?
Yeah, I think the regrets or the times of regret were in moments of just kind of weakness and being tired. You've worked 12, 13 hours. You're going back to this crazy house that you live in, this little room.
Hearing God knows what happening around
exactly.
you.
Exactly. You're eating Metrix big 100 bars for breakfast. You're drinking Metrix Nas pumped for lunch. And you think about, wow, like I could be doing X, Y, and Z in Texas. I could have my friends. I could have all these things that were important to me. It's not like I thought they were important. They were important to me. But I still, as I debated it in my mind, I think I held in a higher regard the potential of what I thought could happen. I didn't know what I thought I could build. And that's the hard thing, is because you never really know.
Right.
You never really know how it's going to turn out. It's not my business. I don't own it. So I can push and I can make changes and I can gain influence over time as I gain respect and relationship capital. But I'm not the end all be all of that business. It's not always my decision. So at the end of the day, I'm placing my hope and trust in other people. I'm placing it in myself, my ability to nudge things one way or the other. And it's a very big calculated gamble. And when you're tired and it's almost 1,000 miles to the dot from Chicago to Pittsburgh, almost 1,000. 1,000 miles away from home at fairly young age. I think 24 in today's world is younger than it used to be.
Yeah.
Those were tough moments.
I want to take just a second to look at a term that Jacob just used, and that's relationship capital. We can sort of intuit what it means, but it's a broader concept than you would think, and it's actually used in valuing and analyzing businesses quite a bit. Without taking everyone to business school, I just want to hit a couple concepts from a Forbes article by Rob Peters from a couple of years ago. This part's a quote. Relationship capital is an open standard of accounting for the quality of interactions between entities, including people, businesses, and products. Interactions include commitments, or actions, and perceptions, which are thoughts and feelings. Basically, every interaction is a scoring opportunity. That's the way I think of it. Everyone is playing the game, and everyone is mentally keeping score. That score really impacts how you think and feel about a business, a coworker, a boss, a vendor, a customer, even family and friends. Another quote, relationship capital quantifies the golden rule. It provides real-time appraisal because you're reacting in the moment to how you're being treated and what your interactions are. And relationship capital demonstrates the quality of character of a business, of a person. So Jacob is building personal relationship capital with his clients, his boss, his coworkers, and he's also helping build it on behalf of the company with those same clients. It's a giant mistake to think that you have any interactions with anybody that don't impact your relationship capital with someone. So you come to that end of that 3-month trial period. What happens then?
Yeah, I don't even know if we ever had a serious conversation, my boss and I, about we're coming to the end of it, more than I'm going to move you from a stipend to a salaried position with a slight bump in pay. It still wasn't a ton of money, nor would I expect it to be. I'd only been there 3 months. And I'm also smart enough to realize the economics of the business. You just know the numbers.
Yeah.
You know what's available. And I was so engrossed and embedded in what I was doing at that point. To me, it wasn't an option to leave.
So basically, your head is down and you're just plowing forward.
100%. And I was supposed to be working on my thesis. I kind of, in good faith, honestly, told my professor that I would work on it, told my mom I would work on it. But when you're working 13 or 14-hour days, when are you going to do it?
Yeah, unless you're capable of doing it in your sleep.
Exactly. And I mean, I was still paying the $1,000 a quarter, whatever it was, to stay enrolled, so that I could have access to professors and databases and labs. And so it's not like I was, and $1,000 back then to me was a lot of money, and I was still paying that money. I mean, it was in good faith, but
how long did you pay it?
Probably a year and a half.
Wow.
Maybe for sure a year and a half.
So did that feel a little bit like a lifeline back, just in case, or was it were you overcoming the guilt of walking away by paying out $1,000?
I think it was more the guilt, I think it was because I just kind of decided that this was going to be my life.
Yeah, and
I for sure felt guilty about leaving. Because someone commits to you in a scholarship, they're counting on you finishing that. And I felt that responsibility. And it still, I would say, still saddens me that I didn't fulfill that obligation. But it wasn't out of, the only thing that gives me peace of mind about it is it wasn't out of laziness, and it wasn't out of, I'm bored. It was out of, in my opinion, pursuing what I went to school to do anyway.
Yeah, there was no animosity, there was nothing to feel guilty about other than just not crossing the finish line with it.
Right, and I also felt like I contributed a lot. I mean, I was always tried to be the first person to volunteer in the lab to help with this, to help with that. I didn't feel like I was just sucking up space, within that department.
There's something else I'm going to throw in here that's worth knowing. The median salary for an athletic trainer is about $45,000, $46,000, with the top 10% making about a little under $70,000, whereas the average neurobiologist makes about $82,000 a year, and the top 10% makes over $155,000 a year. So I don't know that Jacob was using this as part of his decision-making process, but if he did, has there been any point since then that you wish you'd done something different?
That's a really good question, and not one that I've thought about a ton, honestly. Even though you and I have talked briefly about this, man, you haven't asked me that question. I want to say my mom's asked me that at some point, and I think, but it was a while ago, like several years, and I was probably just like, no, you're still relatively young. No, this is what I'm doing. Having been doing this for a while now, I would say there was for sure times where I wish I was doing something different, not because I didn't like what I was doing. You fall into a rut in terms of growth, what's possible, or what you think is possible for what you know. And you get frustrated because you feel like you're putting in work and time and energy and you're excelling at what you're doing, but there's nowhere else to grow. There's nothing else to do. You're constrained by factors out of your control. And during those moments, I think, is when I wanted to change professions and move on. And I don't know if I told you this. I did.
Yeah, I think you did. But let's actually recap what's happened since Chicago and up to now.
Well, no, I did in Chicago.
Oh, in Chicago. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I've told you this.
No.
I might have mentioned it briefly. I usually don't talk about it a ton, not because I'm ashamed of doing it or talking about it, just more out of it's not pertinent to the conversation and a long story. But we're on a podcast. This is edible.
There you go.
So I actually left to work for my church for a year. I was going to become a pastor. I completely quit training. I left my gym. I was all in on becoming a pastor. Part of it being I didn't see an opportunity for me forward. I didn't own the business. I was never going to own the business. Mm-hmm. And knowing that, my income is always going to be limited. / an obligation that I felt like I could contribute to those around me, society, humanity, whatever words you want to use, in maybe a better way. So I left my gym and I went to work for my church for a year. And it's not like a cult or anything weird like that. It's just that's what I thought I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And I missed training a lot. I missed it. And I came back to it. So I came back to work for the same gym that I had left. And because when I left, it was nothing bad, nothing, there was no animosity between us. It was just hey, I think I have a higher calling. And when I came back, I would also say there was no animosity or anything weird. It was all very much open arms. And I was grateful for that. Looking
back on it now, do you think that it was maybe the product of needing a break from what you were doing?
Yes, for sure. I think, so to go back to the question of could I see myself doing something else, I still think I could see myself being a pastor. I think if I could go back in time, I could see myself going down that road and really enjoying it and living a very fulfilled life and pursuing that career and calling. But looking back on it as well, I think I was so burnt out because I had worked so hard for so long. And people who really train a lot of people, there's not a lot of people my age who've trained as many people as I have. And that's not a bragging on myself thing. That's just a function of how efficient our business was. We had a really good business model. We trained a lot of people in a short amount of time. And knowing the hours that I worked and that sacrifice of moving away, those things compound over time. So you can do it for a while, but your passion runs out and reality sets in. And you realize that it's not sustainable. This cycle of living is not going to work long term. But the thing is, you've built yourself into that cycle. It's your own damn fault.
Right.
You've built yourself into that house. You made your bed, right? You got to lay in it. So I think I felt like the only way I was going to make a different bed was to go do it. And I knew that within that space, I couldn't really carve out a different role or go anything. And also, too, part of it is I didn't want to compete against, my friends. I didn't want to quit that gym, open up another thing in Chicago, because I feel like I would be putting my friends out of business in a way. Mm-hmm. Not that I would have put them out of business, but I would be competing for that revenue and that money and those people and those relationships. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel honorable or fair about that.
Only so many there to choose from?
I think...
in terms of clients.
Yeah, I think Chicago is weird. It's a big city, but when you talk about professional athletes and that level of training, there's only a few people doing it really well. Mm. And the reputation that I had built using that gym, I didn't feel like it was fair to capitalize on that down the street, because there's only so many places you can put a gym where pro athletes are and are going to come to. Like, yeah, you can put a normal gym anywhere because there's always people that need to work out. But for pro athletes, it has to be, within respect to downtown, or in Chicago, the north side, where a little more the Bulls practice facility, the Bears training facility was, some more affluent neighborhoods. You couldn't just put it like in the west suburbs or on the south side. You might get one or two, but you would never get enough volume for it to make sense. And I just didn't feel like that was honorable or the right thing to do.
And if you went to another city, basically you'd be starting over, unless there were athletes that had moved on to whatever city that you'd already worked with and moved on to whatever city that you were trying to reestablish in.
Exactly. Yeah, I knew if I was going to do it, I had to literally leave the city. But part of that problem was I had met my wife. I say problem, it's not a problem, it's a great thing. That can be taken out of context really bad.
Yeah. Well, we won't do that.
I met my wife. She was from Chicago. We had our first child, working on our second. And I didn't feel like it was fair to uproot that and take her away from basically what I took myself away from when I was several years younger, for the opportunity, not even like a promise, like the opportunity of something. That just, again, it's like I said with the neuroscience thing. You get down a road and you're kind of committed. It doesn't, yes, you could leave. There's always a choice, but is it the responsible thing to do? Does it make sense to do that? And not even like this trumped up sense of duty. Like, does it make even sense financially? Like, is it worth the hit you would take financially to quote unquote, like, be happy?
So a time came where it became possible for you to actually leave and do other things, pursue other things. And we don't need to get into the mechanism of that. But how does what you're doing now feel different from what you were doing in Chicago, what you left your life in Texas for?
What I'm doing now, even right this second, is more of what I always envisioned myself being in a position to do. I really felt like once you train enough pro athletes, adults, Division I athletes, etc., and you do well at it, you can keep doing that. But I think like anything, it gets a little bit boring to do that all the time, only exclusively. So I didn't want to do that. I knew that. So when I left and started doing my own thing, I wanted to keep training pro athletes. I always will, but I want to train less of them and specific people for periods of time. Because that concentrated effort, I can get really excited about. I can't get excited about doing 12 hours of it. I can get excited about doing 4 hours of it. And I felt like my talent and my experience had yielded a unique perspective where I could bring a teaching / management brain to other businesses and people who could benefit from my experience and expertise. Not saying that I know everything there is under the sun, but again, there's not a lot of people who've had the opportunity to work with the people I did. And our business did very well when I was in Chicago. We grew quite a bit for a service-based, business. We had no members. It was all training-based numbers.
Wow, I did not realize that.
Yeah, we had no members, and our business grew. It almost tripled during my 6-7 years there. So. And we didn't change spaces. I think that's important to know. Like, you're always limited, right, in terms of volume by space.
Right.
So staying in the same space, that's pretty damn impressive. So knowing that I'd built this resume and this experience and this expertise, I really enjoy teaching quite a bit. I think I get that from my mom, teacher.
Probably so.
Even in grad school, we had to teach labs. I really got fired up about that. So I always envisioned myself as a guy that would continue to maintain relevance in the field by training elite athletes, but at the same time switching to a role where I was able to coach coaches, teach teachers. I wanted to do seminars. I wanted to have opportunities to do things like this, like a podcast, and talk about, even if it's not fitness, just my life experience. I wanted to work with brands that I felt like were on the verge of being something great. And if I gave them my experience, it would kind of just nudge them over the edge. So now I've been able to do those things over the last relatively short time, almost 2 years now.
That you sort of went out on your own. You work with, well, dang. And that takes up how much of your day, week, month, year?
Yeah, I would say, so when I left Lual, I had trained in Chicago through our gym. He was a 2-time All-Star working with me. I was his primary coach. And he had moved on. He had gotten traded. He ended up in Los Angeles. So he called me and said, I don't want to start over. I have a lot of good basketball left in me. I would like to offer you a job. Also, he does a lot of foundation work it's kind of two-pronged. He's originally from South Sudan, which has the longest running civil war in modern history. So there's a lot of displaced refugees. He was a refugee.
Some scary numbers associated with the South Sudanese civil war, which started in 2013, up to 300,000 people dead, more than 3.5 million people displaced in a country of only about 12 million, with over 2.1 million of those internally displaced, and over 1.5 million having fled to neighboring countries. Thank you, Wikipedia, for this information, by the way. Basically, famine, disease, starvation, all the horsemen of the apocalypse riding along with pretty much every civil war ever. It's a very sad situation.
But they also happen to have this unique gift of athleticism and height. So he does a lot of foundation work where he does basketball development camps for free for refugees in different parts of the world. He does some work in London, not for South Sudanese refugees, for any kid who's pretty good, free development work, because basketball in London doesn't get a ton of exposure like it does in America, and there's some really good kids. He really felt like strength and conditioning had not only enhanced his career but prolonged it, and he wanted that opportunity to be given to these kids for free. So he wanted that to be part of his vision. He knew that long term I wanted to maybe open up my own gym in some capacity, have a training facility. Again, maybe I'm not the guy training 12 hours a day. I won't be. But having...
Write that down right now.
Right, yeah, note that. But having the opportunity to influence, honestly, hire and train coaches, still have some relevance in terms of training some elite athletes, and really building into the culture and the environment of what that facility is. All of those things were in his vision, and they're also in mine and on my heart. So knowing that those two things lined up, we came up with an arrangement where I'm kind of on retainer with him. So I'm with him a lot of the year when we travel some around the world together to do these camps, to train him. During the NBA season, I'm with him a ton, keeping him healthy and ready to play. And through that, he also was completely fine with me doing whatever else in the hell I wanted to do. So I've been able to become pretty close with Barbell Brigade and kind of be in a consulting role with them, not in terms of media or apparel, specifically gym performance and gym-related things. We're going to be launching a training program there soon, which they've never done before. And I see all sorts of opportunities for the brand and the business that they've built because of the people that they are, where we can really use that platform to move that business forward in the places that I don't think a lot of gyms have gone or even thinking about doing. And to me, that's super exciting.
So you're following what seems like a very logical course, in retrospect.
In retrospect, yes. But as you're going through it, no. Even when I left in Chicago to work for Luol, I heard so many people tell me, you're going to work for one person? How's that going to work when he stops playing basketball? Mm-hmm. And I had to tell him the same thing I had to tell people when I left Texas. I'll figure it out. A lot of people, I really had this mentality of somebody's got to do it. It might as well be me. Somebody's got to do it. Mm-hmm. Somebody is training pro athletes out there. Somebody is building awesome brands in the gym space. Somebody is doing things that are changing the face of the industry that I'm in. Somebody has to do it. Why can't it be me?
And you have the benefit of knowing that these things have a time limit on them and that you have to be planning for what the future is going to bring, what you're going to bring to the future.
Absolutely. And it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about, I think true entrepreneurs who really think hard about their businesses hedge their bets. Would I go and do this for somebody that wasn't Luol? No, I wouldn't. I've trained a lot of really, really good athletes. He's the only person I would do it for because I know what his vision is. I know where his heart is. And I know how committed he is to me and how committed I've been to him. So knowing all those things together, I would rather put my bet on myself with him. If it wasn't with him, I probably wouldn't be doing it. Mm-hmm. And then too, like the seminars through Reebok Chicago, I've been able to do some seminars, meeting you from just being in LA and getting to know people in the fitness industry. If I wouldn't have gone there and done these things, I wouldn't be doing this right now. I wouldn't be talking to you. Mm-hmm. So you can't completely plan it out, but I can hedge my bet. Hey, Luol, I think this is going to go well with us. And then I have to go to those places, be super passionate about what I'm doing, and I think the opportunities present themselves out of that.
So standing at the point that you're at right now, can you envision something coming into your field of vision that is so radically different than what you're doing now that you consider taking a really sharp turn toward that?
I would say no, but if you look at my life, I've taken two really sharp turns.
Yeah.
One leaving Texas, another one leaving Chicago, and a very safe business that I had built myself up in, so I would say no, but I've learned and have enough perspective now that I shouldn't say that because I can honestly say who knows. I think the older you get in terms of responsibility, the more difficult that becomes because I now have 2 children with my wife, wonderful little girls. And as they start getting into school and things like that, you have to think about those things. Right. But I'm not going to rule it out.
Where can people find you?
I am an Instagram guy.
Okay.
Jacob.w.ross on Instagram. The other platforms, I just check to occasionally, basically so no one else steals my name. But I pretty much go through that.
Thanks to my friend Jacob Ross for driving all the way from LA to be on the show. He is a true friend, and he's always got my back. On the next episode of the Less Than Obvious podcast, John Timms wonders whether college debt is something he really wants to get into and looks for the highest paid jobs you can get without a degree, and then launches a side hustle into men's products.
So I just kind of thought to myself, like, maybe this isn't what I want. Like, do I want to incur hundreds of $1,000s worth of student loans and debt to get a job that makes $35,000 a year? And then I kind of looked at the math to pay all that off. It was a sentence. It wasn't a privilege.
You can find me on social media as @TheJimMcD. The show is @LessThanObvious everywhere but Twitter, where it's Less Than OBV. The show is available on most podcast platforms and now Spotify. Great reviews and ratings are much appreciated. Remember, being nice doesn't cost you anything, but it can be worth a lot to somebody else. I'll talk to you again next time.